Welcome back to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. She's back again. The amazing Jill.
How are you, Robbie?
I am hanging in there. You went on a trip. What happened with the trip? Where'd you go?
Well, we went to Orkney, which are the islands to the north of Scotland. Used to belong to Norway, Denmark, now belong to Scotland for the last few centuries, but they're way up off the north of Scotland, and not quite the most northerly part, but yeah, pretty high up.
Now,
So full of Neolithic remains, old houses, all made of stone. It's like something out of the Flintstones, Robbie. Honestly, it's
that,
amazing.
that's what I would like to hear because my one destination I'd really like to go see is I want to go see I can't believe I just had their name, Stonehenge. I want to see Stonehenge so bad. The old history, that old style. I mean, it's not much to look at besides rocks in a circle, sure. But for anybody that really enjoys old history, that is like a giant landmark. It's kind of like seeing the pyramids for a lot of people, except I'm not mainstream. I like to go like where people are like, that's my second choice. I like to use my second choice first because there's less people usually. And Stonehenge is a good one.
Well, that's true. If you were coming as far as Stonehenge, it's a hop, skip, and a jump to Orkney. And Orkney is, I think, way more impressive because you can see the houses that people lived in and little dressers and bed areas, but all made out of stone, like like shelves and cupboards and hearths and fireplaces, all made out of stone.
Did it
And
give
these
you
things
like an
were,
overall like great experience that like at least throughout the ages, men or mankind or the human species has just kind of had this creative side to them? Like, because we a lot of stuff like we talk about creativity, everything's kind of created in a way, but there's still people doing creative endeavors. But back then was a whole different form of creativity. It was like a there's notes of survival into it when you really look down to the bare bones of it.
oh, definitely, because if you couldn't survive the winter, then that was it. Your tribe died out. So these people on Orkney, for example, they had the sea, they had very good land, so they could raise crops, they could breed cattle. The islands are, cows and sheep everywhere, but also they had the sea, so that they could fish. And Orkney people are said to be farmers with fishing boats. If you go further north, the Shetlanders are said to be fishermen with a small farm, or what they call a croft in Scotland. But all these people just lived off the land. There was hardly any wood because they somehow managed to chop down the forest and the forest didn't regrow. So they had very little wood. So they had to build in stone. It's fantastic. If you get as far as Stonehenge, just get yourself up to Orkney. It's amazing.
Now, was this like a planned trip that you wanted to do for a long time, or do you go there like every couple of years or something?
No, this was a planned trip. And because we can't travel abroad at the moment, or it's very difficult to travel to mainland Europe, we decided we'd take advantage of that and just travel within Scotland, but we'd go, maybe further afield than we usually go in Scotland.
I um I bet that puts you into like a kind of a mood, I'd say, when it comes to like making your audio drama too. Like there's that feeling would make me want to get down to writing something or at least reading some type of history book. I was getting into like a big UFO craze recently, especially with talking to people that study UFOs and stuff like that and the UFO documents that came out. I started watching nothing but documentaries about it on, Netflix and Hulu. And I'm like, man, if you really look, there isn't anything out there for like us to be able to understand if there is something out there.
Mm-hmm. There's too much evidence to be ignored, isn't there?
Well, I think the grand aspect that I really appreciate about people is the idea of striving to better, but also knowing in our minds that there has to be more than what we know right now. And I think that's kind of the key to life is always understanding that where you're at right now is good. It's not bad, no matter however perspective wise you look at it. But there's always something down the road that's going to enchant your life a little bit more, even if it might seem like a curse in a way, even though there might be a stressor in your life. Like we all have bills, we all have different shifts and tides. But one thing that keeps on going is life, the ocean and stuff like that. Like recently, the moon was like pretty huge. And I mean, if you really take a moment like I do to make myself feel humble sometimes as I sit on my steps and I look up at night and I like to stare at the sky and look at all like how minuscule we are in the grand aspect of things. But if you take that the wrong way, it can make you feel like you're insignificant. But if you take it in the right manner of understanding that somewhere in the world, someone is feeling exactly what you're feeling at this moment in time, and you're not alone. There's so much out there for you to understand. It's very, very humbling. And I think that's what you get at a place like you visited. You visit something like that, you get a humbling experience of what your life is now compared to what people had to do back in the day, an examination of a sort.
I think as well, coming back to what you said about human creativity, there's something really fascinating about people that, yeah, they were subsisting, they had to work really hard to survive, but we saw things like dice made out of stone, with the numbers all on as we would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they played games, so they had to sit and carve these things before they could play, but they had a life that was partly enjoyment, partly fun. Artifacts that you don't know quite what they are, but they look as though they were just for the pleasure of having something, a ball game, or these little carved balls that they had. I could imagine them playing bowls on the grass, or I don't know. It puts you in touch with human beings and the ways in which they haven't ever changed over 5,000 years. We've still got something in common with these people.
I think a lot of times I've used the example of like, if the power went off, how long would you sit and wait for someone to figure out what happened and turn it back on?
Mm-hmm.
Eventually you realize that the power's not coming back on and you have to start doing things on your own to be able to make it do so. If you really examine what you said about like people making little dice, imagine the person that's spending what, an hour or two carving little numbers into a dice to be able to roll it, to be able to play a game, that they have a vision in their mind of something they want to capitalize. It just shows you that human innovation, when it comes to the aspect of when you see something, what's stopping you from having the opportunity to make that vision come true? If you feel like taking a trip, take a trip. I think we get caught up in the hooks of what our life is, when our
Yeah.
routines, our jobs, our I guess goals or accomplishments, and we realize like, well, I can't do that because this is here and I have this job I got to go to tomorrow. Well, what in the grand scheme of things, are you going to be at that same job a year from now? Is it going to be guaranteed 100% that you're going to live that thing forever? You don't know. The next last time we talked, I had no idea what was going down the road the next day for me. I didn't know what job I was going to be to. Still doing the same thing, but on a grand aspect of like, I'm not tied down to where if I lost it, I would be completely wrecked like a lot of people. I would try and find, maybe that would be a great move to move on to a new journey or a new life, or move somewhere different, get a change of location. There's a lot of stuff that I feel like with life doesn't just, people say it weighs you down. It definitely does, but you can choose to let it also raise you up in the aspect of how you choose to perceive the things that you're able to accomplish when it comes to what have you done today that's successful. Well, getting out of bed in my mind is being successful. We compare very largely out of proportion, a lot of people do, to the grand scale of what we see on social media, when it's just making sure that you're able to look in the mirror and smile and not hate the person that's looking back at you.
Do you think as well that the restrictions that have been imposed on us, you're the same, I think, in the States as we are, we've had quite a lot of restrictions placed on us, and it's a bit like the lights going out, suddenly you can't see your family, or you can't travel abroad, or you can't get the sunshine, all these things that seem really important. You shift your perspectives so that seeing the family on Zoom becomes a treat, whereas before you probably can't be bothered to do that. I don't know how to use Zoom, especially older people can't learn how to do it. Suddenly we've learned to do these things because rather than sit at home and miss our families, we've chosen to learn new technology. Or in our case, we weren't allowed to go outside the fairly small boundaries of the county where I live. And so you thought, this is really boring. We live in East Ayrshire. We're not near the coast. We can see the sea, but we can't go there. But then we found these walks, amazing walks along riverbanks, fields, trees, old houses, old ruins that we didn't even know were there. And we've lived in this area for decades, you know. So COVID could have been a closing down. It was a closing down, and it was tragic for many people. But for people who wanted to, it could be an opening up. It could open the world up to things that we hadn't noticed before, hadn't tried before.
You truly only appreciate the things when they're gone, or when someone says that you can't access them. Like, why, when a person is diagnosed with, hey, you can't ever eat peanut butter or you'll die, you want it more. You know, you have this thing to you where you understand, like, I live at a beach town. The ocean is right out this window that's behind me, behind these dark curtains. But what do I ever want to go into it? No, because I spent so much time going into it 24/7. But when I start to go a state over and I start to see that the ocean's not there anymore, I start to miss the aspect of being right on the water. It's what's ingrained to you so much, and it's constant there. You never think that it's not going to be there because, well, who can take out the ocean? That's true. But
Yeah.
nobody says it couldn't also take out your life, where you're not here the next day and you're not going to be able to enjoy these things that you used to, take for granted so much. Lockdown, I think, is a very sketchy subject to talk about, on the concept of people feel strongly on either side of it. And I look at it like this: I don't think anybody should force you to do something that you don't want to do. If you want to go out and see your family, I know plenty of people that lost family members that couldn't see them in their dying moments. Nothing's holding me back from stopping me to see the loved ones on their last moments. But I understand the safety aspect. I'm just not a fan of the division that it's bringing into the world right now, that it's going to cause more and more people to argue and more people to want to police each other, when half the people that are telling you you got to stay inside, you're going to kill somebody. I'm like, when have you ever given a shit about the people around you? You spent so much time flicking off people in traffic and cursing at them that now you care about people. Like, you start to look at the hypocrisy in it all.
Yeah, I know. We're coming out of it now, thank goodness. But I think some of us have learned a lot from it. Others have lost a lot. You know, what can you say?
I know we're done. We've been done with masks for a while, but then California went back to going to masks, and now it's starting to kind of sweep away around the country, where people are like, "Should we bring back masks?" And now it's like you have to be mandatory vaccines, and I'm like, you know, you're not incentivizing people to want to go do anything in the world when you make it so damn hard and difficult to be able to do anything. People take the risks that they can. The best thing you can do is be able to protect yourself. I mean, there are things I want to accomplish in this world, but might not be able to get it at the moment, because on an aspect of, it's so hard to even travel anywhere out of the States. There's no way you're doing anything without proper passports and records of things that, they want you to have. And I look at, like, I get the safety aspect, but an aspect of, like, how quick is life, how we have it in 1 minute, and we truly appreciate, like, this conversation that we're talking with, it's an hour. But if you really examine that hour, what could you be doing in the hour? Would you just be sitting on your phone and just doing what you usually do, your routine? You're watching TV or something, cooking something, or doing whatever, cleaning your house maybe? Or would you take that hour to make a spontaneous trip into your backyard and truly observe all the birds that are flying through the air, the flowers that are growing, and notice, wow, there's a brown stain in the grass. I never even noticed that part before. It's like, no, because how long have you actually sat on your back porch? I know so many people that are like, I have a pool. And I'm like, when's the last time you went swimming? Like 2 years ago. So why do you have the pool? Well, it looks nice. And I'm like, so you just have it and you stare at it? Yeah, well, I never had a pool before and I wanted one, and then I got a pool. I just never go into it. I just have it though. So if I ever want that opportunity to go swimming, and I'm like, you start to notice some weird stuff where it's like, when's the last time you sat on your back porch? Just the other day. When was the other day? It was like fall. I'm like, that was almost a year ago. Like, we're in summer right now, so that's close to half a year ago. So you start to really examine, like, what are you doing that you think, oh, it's always going to be there, and then one day it's not.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's that poem that my mum always liked? It's this: what is life if full of care we have no time to stand and stare? We should stand and stare. We should go into our back gardens or backyards or whatever, and we should just stand and look at it because it's wonderful. My back garden is surrounded by trees. And the thing that I most noticed when we were in Orkney, which was a fantastic holiday, but the thing I most noticed was that there were hardly any trees, very few trees. It's a very sort of flat, well, not flat, but it's a kind of a bleak landscape. It's beautiful in its way, but it's wild and remote. But where I live, we're surrounded by trees. So I spent the whole of my yesterday in the back garden. And actually, I was sitting outside 10 minutes before I was talking to you. Um, Partly because in Scotland, we don't take the good weather for granted. Even in the summer, we can't take it for granted. It could be raining tomorrow, it could be pouring tomorrow. I think it probably will. So when the weather's good, you just get outside as much as you can. But if I had a pool, Robbie, I'd be swimming every day.
I was like that for the longest time because I was always a water kid. But I spent so many years doing jet skis where I was out 12 to 14 hours a day
Wow.
on a jet ski because on a jet ski, they'll be like, hey, next ride's coming up. Just stay out there and we'll get you on the way back. And then it's like you never get food. So you're sitting on 12 for 14 hours hungry on a jet ski in the burning sun. My skin was like, I couldn't describe it. I'll send you pictures. It was so dark because I was just in the sun for so many years. And I had the worst life jacket tan you had ever seen. Like as pale as I am right now, compared to like just like the darkest tan you could ever see. Like I look like I was putting on tanning oil. But it was something where I'm like the other day, like how you said you sat in the your back on your porch and kind of observed everything. I sat yesterday on at my buddy's house. He lives right on the water. I do too, but his house is a lot nicer. Um, we were drinking a little bit, but I was sitting on the back porch and just examining the water, looking at the trees. And I had this thought come into my head. There was a moment in my life where I spent a lot of my time, and I think a lot where people say you've aged beyond your years. Most of it came from isolation. Most of it came from being by myself, mostly because my parents worked all the time. So it was a lot like, hey, there's food in the fridge, but I got to go to work. So spending a lot of time alone, I I looked at my life now and I go, how many times have I been in the same predicament 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 7 years ago, 8 years ago? And all the moments I didn't understand about being in isolation or being alone that really favored in the future for understanding and being more of an open minded individual. I look at the information I pulled out of that now. How many times have I sat with my own thoughts like a hermit and really thought things through about where life was going to go and doing the same thing now? I look at it like, is a lot changed? Has my growth been affected? Has there anything different than I am 10 years ago where I am at in this moment right now? And I noticed one thing is I never want to be in a crowd of people where I don't recognize anyone's face. I always want that communication aspect that a lot of people take for granted. The worst pain in the world is being in a group of people and nobody knowing my name. That scares me more than anything because I think we all want to be remembered in some type of fashion. That's why we create content or we create an audio drama or we create something, a legacy, something that's going to bring excitement into somebody's life. And that's the joy that we receive. That's why comedians like to make people laugh. That that risk of doing something that has very, very little payoff when it comes to money, but the huge extreme payoff of bringing someone joy in a time where they might need it. That is something I would prioritize over anything of having a mansion or it would be nice to have $1 billion, 100%. And Jill, the excitement news I wanted to tell you about was, I did not win the lottery. That's not the news,
Oh,
but I've had many people from the BBC on my show and I've been like, I don't like you. And they're like, what? I'm like, cause you're, and I brought you up. I was like, cause Jill, every time they start going, yeah, I made this thing for the BBC. I'm like, we don't talk about the BBC here. And I'd look at the camera and that's for you.
oh, that's good. So they haven't contacted me yet.
Really?
No.
We don't need them. We can start our own.
They will. They will.
One day. But I think it's important to really notice the grand aspect of things is I think comparisons of change. When I look at my life where it is now compared to where I was 10 years ago, there's a drastic change. Mostly because when I was fresh out of high school, I didn't think the world, like I thought I had it figured out a little bit. Now, and through the past couple of years of doing the show, I've really understood that there's only one solidified answer to everything. And that is that you truly admit that you know nothing. There is nothing definitive in the world when it comes to what we know now compared to what's going to be the next day, compared to what's going to be 5 years from now. The only thing that you can do is, like how Bruce Lee says, be like water. You have
Mm.
to learn to flow around these
Mm.
obstacles that get put on our path. We spend too much time trying to move them and waste a good chunk of our life attacking one obstacle when you don't understand it's a river of obstacles. You're just at the first block. If you stay and hold on to that one thing, you're truly never going to float forward and go past into the other obstacles or goals that you have to accomplish.
I think that's an incredibly mature way of looking at things. Honestly, sorry, I hope that doesn't sound patronizing, but I think it takes a lot of people a long, long time to realize that, if they ever do realize that. If you're trying to stand in the river and hold it back and keep it from changing, you're either going to get swept away or you're going to get very wet, aren't you? And the world changes all the time. We change with the world all the time. I'm really interested though in something that you said, because your show has become really popular, and I want to know what it was that really motivated you to start doing this, to say, right, okay, I can do this. I can go on Zoom, I can talk to people all over the world and make this interesting for other people to listen to. What was behind that? Why did you do that in the first place?
I've noted at it a few times before a long time ago. I actually ended up having the kid on my podcast, but I got a random call after, like, I used to sit with a kid so the full story is I used to sit with a kid at lunch and we'd only sit and talk for 30 minutes. But every time I would talk to him, we'd have a good chat. And eventually I gave him my phone number. And then like 5 years later out of high school, I got a random call in the middle of the night and I answered it. I was like, hello. And I knew it was his number. So I was like, what's going on? It's like 1 a.m. And he's like, hey, man, I'm on my roof right now and I'm not liking life. And I ended up talking him down from jumping off of his roof, which when he came on my show, when it first started, we talked about it a little bit. His name's Brooks Holloway. He's a great dude. Um, but it was the aspect of conversation, how much a conversation can really impact someone. And I went to school for chemical dependency and studied a little bit into psychology. And one of the main things they start to teach you about is mental health and depression and all these things, why people turn to drugs and all this. You start to notice it's an aspect of being alone is the big can be the big there are so many when I talk about the isolation, for instance, there are so many instances in my life where that could have been a bad way of getting
Mm.
information or a perspective out of something, is being like the world sucks, all this type of stuff, and getting a really bad perspective. But using it to enhance and find spots where I can fix things has been one of the things I still do today, where I look outside and stare and just take a minute to relax. That minute can be a defining effect in good or bad, depending on how you take it. And the aspect of conversation, it's so easy to talk to people, but nobody's incentivized to do so. No one should pay you for talking to someone. No one should pay you for, or no one should give you compliments if you do. The best thing you can do is understand it's an energy exchange. Either way, when we get done with this chat, it's going to have us in some type of mood or feeling where we feel like we can take on the world, or we feel happy and refreshed, or it goes a different direction. But you are the craft. We both are the writers of this story right now. We're going to decide on where it goes. And I find that has so much power to it. The spoken word, I mean, not just in poetry, but an aspect of the things that we say with our mouths, how we can hurt with certain words, how we can make amazing feelings of certain words, how it can be turned into song form to really understand and get the gravity of a situation, or get the goosebumps and hair sticking up on your arms. And I'm like, that's a whole avenue that we have completely neglected as people when it comes to, we get stuck in routines. We worry too much about just trying to survive. And I think if life was a little bit more easier, we would have more conversations. If life wasn't so difficult to survive, we'd have a lot more of this going on. But it's an aspect of the way the world's working. And I think a way to fix it is by us doing our own parts. And that's just by taking care of ourselves and our community, because your community branches out larger than you think. Throughout my show, where I'm at now, compared to where throughout some episodes, I've met people that have went to school with people that have been on my show that we just found out in the middle of an episode. They didn't know. They're like, you know that guy? I know that guy. And I'm like, so you start to realize the more people you talk to, you make friendships with, you base everything off your similarities. I think your differences are what's really going to make the relationship thrive, because it's all information. You're supposed to get new information. If you just sit there and talk about the same information every single time, you're never getting growth. You're only getting like this state of lull. And it's much like life. If you stay in the same job for 30 years, you might work your way up, but what drastic changes are you making in the era of what you want to do with your goals or aspirations inside of yourself? And me even saying all this is going to sound pretentious as hell for like some person going, he's 23 years old, what is he talking about? I don't know anything. That's the whole point. I'm just on this path right now where I've noticed certain things that I've adjusted in my life to make it go in a certain direction. I'm not where I want to be. I'll never be where I want to be. But that's the most important part, is I never want to get to where I'm supposed to be. That keeps me working and progressing to get and try my hardest to get as close as I can to the damn mark.
Yeah, because the trick is to stay curious. Curiosity is the key, because if you're curious about things, about other people, about their lives and how the differences, as you say, if you're curious about things, then you're never going to stop learning. I'm really interested in what you say about conversations. There's it's a Facebook post that I've seen, and I can't remember which country it is, but there's a country where they have it's like a human library, right? So you can book a conversation with a person from a completely different cultural background, or a different sexual orientation, anything, different country, different language, whatever, and you can book a conversation, and you can sit down face to face and have a conversation with a person that probably it's unlikely you would ever have met in real life. And I just think that sounds like a fantastic idea. It's kind of what you're doing. I just think it would be an amazing idea to be able to say, right, I would like to speak to, I don't know, a member of the Amish community who lives in America. I know nothing about it. Or I'd like to speak to someone who's been brought up in the Ukraine. I know nothing about the Ukraine. I'd just like to talk to someone whose life has been there. I just think that's a phenomenal idea. But you've got like your own library shelves there, Robbie, haven't you?
I pull inspiration from a lot of things. I mean, I pull inspiration from you. I mean, like we talked about in the beginning, when we said with the BBC, for instance, on your first episode, you could have let that stop you, but you didn't. You kept on going and creating content and doing things that you wanted to do because you had a vision inside of your head. How many people, like we talked about in the beginning of this episode, the dice, they had a vision inside of their head they had to get out. We just changed it into a different format. There's still creativity happening. There's plenty of new stuff that can be created, but it's about finding something that hasn't been done before, which is not going to lie, it's a pain. But there was a comedian I grew up watching on YouTube. That was when he first got to start. His name's Bo Burnham. He stopped about 5 years ago doing comedy because he was getting such bad panic attacks that he couldn't do it anymore. He's very social, like just anxiety, everything. His new special came out on Netflix about, he made it all out of his lockdown and his pandemic, all by himself, all the editing, all the choreography, everything. And it's all about the feeling of the world right now and everything, like different songs and bits. He's kind of like a comedy musician. Now he's nominated for an Emmy.
Wow.
You start to look at, like, you have a lot more talents in your mind and in your body than you think you do. But the way that life is ironic. You're going to think and be very distorted on what you can do, because when you do accomplish something you never thought you could do, you realize you have more inside of yourself than you do. And that's kind of how we all live right now, is like, oh, I can't do that. I'm not that type of person. How do you know? How do you know if you've never put in the time and effort? My show is just a show. I'm not making money off of it. I'm having fun doing it because I would like to, sure, but I also don't want it to ruin my thriving and my striving to want to produce and make and meet the amazing people like yourself that do come on. People out there, there's a new one out there. It's called Her Daddy. I don't want to give her a shout out, but she does like a sexual style podcast. She's already famous for being like on OnlyFans and those types of sites, but they gave her $60 million to do a podcast, and she doesn't have any good content. It's all like really weird and awkward. But hey, maybe it's not for me. But at the same time, it's about, like, there are some people that want to, look at somebody else and go, I'll never be like that. You might be better than that person, but it's going to take you a little bit of a longer haul to get where they're at, because you're not at the same starting lines. Some people have starting lines that are 1,000 feet in front of yours. And then you got to figure out what's your way that you can be successful using the method that you need to do to get there. That's the tough question. How long until that payoff is? Are you willing to put in 5 years? Are you willing to put in 10? Are you willing to put in 30 years to where you finally get that success that you want when you're an old person or something? A lot of people don't want that. They want it right now. And I'm like, man, it's the long haul that's the sweeter drink.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's absolutely true. I'm trying to think now. It's probably 4 years since I started seriously producing audio drama, and I've just recently been working on something that is part of a bigger project that's being produced in Australia. So it's like a murder mystery series, and lots of different writers wrote an episode of this series. So that's fun. I've now worked with two other writers. One is one of my producers. He's done production for me, but he wanted to start writing, and he wanted to record a piece. So I did some directing, some editing, and some directing with him. Another friend who traditionally writes theatre plays, but we can't really go into the theatre at the moment. We're not sure when we'll be able to get into the theatre. So he said, well, I could maybe turn this into an audio drama. And will you help me turn this into an audio drama? And so you're right, because it starts to spread out, and you're asked to help here and asked to help there. And I've got some funding, actually. I've got some Creative Scotland funding. It's a body that funds new artists across the whole board, not just writers. So I've got some funding from them to produce 3 plays that are based in my local area. This means that I can pay actors, I can pay the producers. It's not all going to be voluntary stuff now. Some of them have done fantastic work for me already without getting paid very much. And now that means that I can pay them a proper rate for the job because I've got the funding from the government. So that's taken me 4 years. It's taken me 4 years to get to that point. And it just means life. Every time I sit down at my desk to do some work, it's like, well, this is really good fun. I'm doing something that's fun today, and tomorrow I'll be doing something else that's fun. It's just great. I mean, it's great. It beats going to work, I'm telling you.
I think it's crazy because when you're creating content, like you were saying about like, well, theaters, we don't know when they're going to be back open. If you really care about the thing that you're doing, you're going to find another way to make sure that it achieves what you want it to achieve, which is turning it
That's
into an
right.
audio drama. When you see a
That's
plant
right.
and it's growing in shade, it turns and grows and tries to get all crooked a little bit, but it tries to find the sunlight. It tries to find the path. Now, a lot of people will sit there and go, well, I want this to be like this. This is all I want. It's like, but do you want it? Because if you want it, you'll truly do anything you possibly can to make sure that it turns into the thing that you want it to be. You have the vision in your head. You might need help finding a way to craft out the tool or getting it to its point, but you have the capacity to do so. Nobody's telling you that you can't.
Mm. We're also surrounded by people that can help us. If we just stop and think for a minute, we're surrounded by people who know way more than we do about certain things. So, for example, I'm okay on social media, but because of the age I am, I'm really not an expert. But I know loads of people who are. It's the same with putting videos on YouTube. I don't know how to do that yet, but I soon will know how to do it because I've got a friend who's really good at it. And
Ask me, I'll help you.
great. That's fantastic. That's 2 of you then.
I got
Because
almost 1,000 episodes up. I think I can help you.
I know you're right. Absolutely. You're an absolute expert on that. But it's right, isn't it? We, even if I was going to say we can't do everything ourselves, we can do a lot more, but it's also about deciding, well, what am I best at? Where am I best going to put my time? That's my creative input. And there are other people who are already much better at this than I am. So just take a shortcut and learn from them because they've spent a long time learning this. So sometimes I think we don't think creatively about other people's creativity because it's amazing what we're surrounded with. And, people like to help you. I have found people like to help you.
I think you can expect help from others, and you should never think that that's wrong to do so, but you also can't be reliant on the fact that someone else has to do something for you as well too. It's very,
Well,
very hard to get someone to do something for you if they're not truly interested into the task. And I think a lot of it comes to self-learning as well too. You have to learn a lot, and really it's not bad to put your trust in people. I think you should always put some trust into people, but always expect that you don't know what this outcome is going to be. So make sure you can also still have it managed on your own as well. I don't tack on anything more than I can handle.
mm,
If I sit there and say, like, I had a buddy that was creating an audio drama for a while, and he had another dude upload it for him. Eventually the relationship fell out, and then he had to go and do it on his own, but he kept asking me, send him links, send him links. And I'm like, man, I can't, and I won't. And he's like, why? I'm like, because if you really care about it, like you said, you care about it, and you've expressed to me how much you care about it, you'll do the time and research to be able to figure out how to do so. You get that start done. I'll help you from there. And then he ended up uploading up to Anchor, getting everything uploaded himself, getting the first couple episodes crafted out. He's loving doing it. And I'm like, see, because you are creating it, it's your baby now. When
mm,
it's your baby, you care about it more than handing it off to someone else. Handing it off to a nanny, they might help and feed your kid and do the manageable things to make sure they can survive until you get back from your date. But at the same time, they also don't really care a whole lot when it comes to it's not their baby.
mm. It's back to learning again, isn't it? It's back to curiosity, and it's back to learning. So you can learn quickly by having an expert in that help you to do it. But yeah, it's about learning to take charge of things yourself.
I think everyone has a purpose, but when does that purpose be accomplished, or when does that purpose be fulfilled? I don't think that's ever possible. I don't
No,
think your
no,
purpose is ever done until you truly have left this earth. I think
no,
your purpose is whatever it is. And then that one instance when your time is up, it's up. But
yeah,
when and where, I like the mystery in that. I like knowing that there's no I don't like having answers as much as I ask questions. I don't like having answers. I always like having those questions. What I find it weird is, like, I think where I never got along with religion a whole lot was whenever I'd ask a question, they ended up telling my grandparents I needed to leave because I was like asking way too many. And I was like, man, like that's the whole point of life, is asking questions and hoping that someone can give you an influence of an answer.
yeah.
There are no definitive answers.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think when you meet people who's who have a purpose, and it might not be the purpose that they had 20 years ago. My purpose 20 years ago was, well, no, maybe more than 20 years ago, was helping my kids grow up, and that was the most important purpose. And then when they've grown up and they're doing their own thing, that shouldn't be my primary purpose anymore. And so then you move on to something else. But if people can't move on with the river as it flows, then it's really difficult. And you meet people who are kind of stuck. I used to be a coach, a life and business coach. And a lot of people are very stuck in a life that isn't, they're not enjoying, or there's no joy in it for them, or it's just, I don't know, just grey and miserable. And I think it's very easy to get stuck because there's so much around us that we feel we have to do. But when you meet people who are not stuck, who know what their purpose is. So I've got a friend who's recently opened an art gallery. Actually, I've got two friends in later in life who've recently opened art galleries, and they're loving it. And you can feel that's coming off them, that whole sense of creativity and purpose. If you meet people who are kind of, oh, well, I'm retired, or I can't wait to retire, and I don't know what I'm going to do next, and then that energy is like a black hole, it almost sucks everything into it. So there's a real difference between people who have a purpose, whatever that purpose is, and people who don't.
I think it's very easy to say that you want to know I want to know what my purpose is. I want to know what I'm meant on this earth to do. But I also like the fact that I don't know, because then that leaves my open opportunity to be able to go anywhere I want to do. I might end up making shoes down the line. I have no clue. That'd be awesome. What I don't like that when you find out the answer to something, especially what your purpose is, that many people would like to know. Like, when do you know? If I could tell you right now, if I wrote on a piece of paper, here's the day you die, would you want to look at it? I wouldn't, because it's going to pinpoint me down to I know that I have everything I can possibly do in the world until that day. I don't
Mm,
want, even when I have thoughts, how many thoughts in my head are my own and how many are something that's been influenced by something I picked up in a conversation or something I've seen or something I've developed along the way. I start to look at it like when people have these biases when it comes to political or when it comes to the like the restrictions and lockdowns, all these type of things. Do you feel that way because you've only been involved in that one group for so long, or are you as open-minded as possible to understand that everyone is the hero in their own story?
mm, mm,
If you can truly let that sink in and understand that, you understand that what this person might seem like the biggest enemy in your life right now is actually just a person that's viewing you in the same exact way. And you start to realize that the conflict that you're really arguing about isn't going to matter when it comes to the grand scheme of things. And it helps you really take a load of stress off.
mm, mm. Do you think you have one particular purpose in life?
I do, but I don't like it.
Right.
It's
That's
connecting people, sadly.
okay.
I like
Okay.
helping people out and getting friends, but it's also like I'm a stepping stone. So it's like once someone uses me to get to someone else, and then next thing you know,
Right.
I'm like which I don't mind. I think that's probably what I'm best at is I'm able to see certain things and see what goes together and mixes well together. Same thing
Mm,
with like clothing, for instance. When I look at clothes, I know what looks good on a shirt and what,
mm,
but in the grand scheme of it, if that's my purpose and it brings someone else satisfaction, I consider that's a pretty good purpose in the grand scheme that you're able to make someone else's life better. It might not
mm,
increase my own, but
mm,
that is also a factor of what I base being happy on. If
mm,
making someone else happy that I've always wanted to do with jokes and things of that sort,
mm,
that to me is a good purpose.
mm. That could lead on. That could lead on to all kinds of other things, though, all manner of other things. I can see that purpose fanning out into all kinds of other things. If you're only 23, you've got lots of time.
I'm hoping. I was trying to just make it to 26. I don't know what's past 26.
Try 66.
You're not 66.
Oh, 66.
You look great for 66.
Oh, well, thank you very much. But I just had my 66th birthday last month.
I know. I wish you happy birthday on that one. I didn't know it was 66 though. I don't ever look at the age on Facebook. I always just say happy
No, never
birthday.
do. No, no, don't look. Don't look. It's best not to know. Best not to know.
Would you say that with your life that you've had a pretty good life and you're looking forward to the next rest of it?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
when you talked about raising your kids and having that purpose, I was like, that's a purpose that can be completed and that you don't have to, but is it truly ever over with? Because you're always
Yeah.
worrying and wondering how they're doing.
No, it's not. It's not ever over with. No. Oh, that would be really sad if it were over with. It changes, of course, because you're no longer responsible for keeping them safe. Minute by minute, day to day, or hopefully you're not financially responsible for them living their lives. If you're lucky and if you've done your job a certain way, then they become individuals who can live on their own, and you don't need to be running after them. But you're never ever going to stop being concerned for them or worried about them. Or sometimes actually the hardest thing is stepping back from them and saying, right, you're on your own now. I'm not responsible for you anymore. I'm not going to question what you do or give you advice or tell you how I would do things or how I think you should do things. Actually, sometimes that's the hardest part. You've got to step back from them and go, hey, then this is your life now. This is the life that you've chosen to live and the way you've chosen to live it. The person you've chosen to live it with is really, really important that you then leave them alone. But the beauty in my life is that now I've got one grandchild. I've got another grandchild on the way. I'm back to the running round. Oh my God, what's he going to do next? Can't take my eyes off him. So no, you never ever. If you're lucky, you're always going to have those people in your life. But
It's
it's
crazy
different.
because I see my parents like I have nephews and things of that sort. So I see like my parents, they spoil the crap out of them. Like, where was this when I was a kid? And it's like, oh
Yeah.
no, it's their time to be spoiled because they're the grandparents. And it's
Yeah.
same thing I experienced when I was a kid with my grandparents, which I look back at those moments so much. And I'm like, I really, if we invent time travel, I would love to go back to my 15-year-old self or 14-year-old self and just give me one good whack to the back of the head where I was like, you don't understand what you're missing at this dinner table. You're on your phone. You're not paying attention. Those are moments I would pay so much money to get back that
Yeah.
are no longer available to me.
Yeah, you never get them back, do you? Grandparents, I think, are some of the most valuable people in the world. Again, if you're really lucky and you have known your grandparents, that's a relationship that puts it gives you a whole different facet, I think, to your childhood and subsequent life. I was lucky. I had 4 grandparents till I was 8, and I had 3 grandparents till I was grown up. So I think I was really, really lucky to have those people in my life.
I was very fortunate to know my great grandparents until I was probably 14, 15 years old.
Were you? Your great grandparents?
Yeah, we
Wow.
have a photo on my Facebook. I think it's me, my dad, my grandfather, and my great grandfather. And it's just 4 generations in one thing. And it's like, man, I remember a really interesting because my great grandparents and my grandparents they live in Baltimore, so they're about 3 hours away. So I see them on occasions like holidays and things. But when I think one of the last times I saw my great grandfather, we were sitting there and my dad and my grandpa had left to go down to the store because my great grandfather, all he wanted was KFC. I'm like, we can go out to like a restaurant and get like good food. Like, no, I want KFC. It's like, okay. So they ended up coming back. You get a thing of chicken, you get some biscuits, all this type of stuff. I'm always about the biscuits because I love a nice butter biscuit. And he's eating the chicken, but he's eating one at a time, like putting one on a plate and then taking his plate over and sitting down. I'm like, just put a couple on there so you don't have to get back up. And he goes, he was raised in the 20s. So he would take the whole chicken bone and stick it all the way in his mouth and suck on the bone and like even eat some of the bone a little bit and put it on his plate. And I'm like, why? What is the purpose of that? And he goes, I grew up where there was nothing. That era of, and I didn't truly sink this in until he died. And then looking through his house, he had money stashed all over the place, like in random corners of the couch and random like holes in the walls that were covered up by a picture to store money. The floorboards you pull up, there was money in there. And it was because you never knew when something was going to happen where you'd have something like that to turn to. It was all about storing and all about scavenging and saving because you never know when something is going to randomly happen. I mean, times of war. And
Yeah.
it was just to see the things that we have to deal with now. The problems I wouldn't say are better or worse. I think they're the exact same, but they've just taken new forms. You
Yeah.
never had to worry about the internet and social media back in
Yeah.
the day that have kind of
Yeah.
made enemies on the forefront,
Yeah.
rather than always having it in your pocket and always having to check to make sure you're not, something didn't happen or something, you're just flooded with more information, which I
Yeah.
consider a different type of stress. But man, times change so
Yeah.
quick. If you would, I had someone tell me, he goes, I can't talk about much, but I can talk about what it was like before the cell phone. And I'm like, anybody in their 20s or above could talk about before the cell phone, but you don't truly understand of that's 20 years. And we have these devices
Yeah.
that can just do anything that we can think of
Yeah.
anytime. You want socks with sandals, you can
Yeah.
search it up on the internet. You want Amazon to ship something to your house in a day, it'll do so.
Yeah. It's like 1984. It's like Big Brother in your pocket.
Yeah.
It knows where you go. It knows what you buy. It knows what you think. It can send an advert that you've just mentioned that you might be interested in a hot tub, and suddenly you've got adverts in your pocket about hot tubs. It's like Big Brother. So, your great grandfather didn't have to deal with that, but he had to deal with being hungry.
It's like, it's even when I look back at like my very first episodes and then compared to where I'm at now, and I just look at like what I was thinking at that time period, and it's just like, man, you have no clue what's gonna, like, I'm curious to what the next 2 years are gonna hold if I look back on this, or the next 4 or 5 years. And I think that's a sign of success. You're
You've
not
achieved
staying
it.
placent.
Yeah. You've achieved a huge number of listeners, haven't you?
A good amount.
It's
I don't know.
fantastic.
I try not to get obsessed with it, but apparently I thought I was going to celebrate when I hit 100,000 plays, but then I didn't know about, I think probably a year and a half ago, I signed up for another distribution site that I never check. So then I clicked on there. They're like, oh yeah, you've passed that mark. And I'm like, well, yours.
Wow.
And then the other two I've been counting off of means I'm actually way past what I forgot to celebrate.
Oh, well, you need to do it today then. Get out and celebrate.
I think talking to you is a good enough celebration.
Oh,
Always a
thank you.
pleasure having you on, Jill. I like talking to you.
Yeah, I like talking to you too. Oh, this is great. But honestly, congratulations, because I think that's a fantastic achievement. People are listening to you all over the world. And do you do this every week? Is it every week you do a
Every day.
show? Wow.
So you were on, I think, 500 something or close to the 600 mark. And then right now well, when this episode was recorded was around 860 something.
Wow.
So we're close. We're coming up to the 1,000 mark. Eventually we'll get there. But I like it because I think I'm best at being consistent. And I don't think a lot of people understand with being consistent. I've worked out every day for 9 years, and the consistency in that, it builds up results. I think that's the thing that gets me the most is when I see people come into my work, my gym, and they work out trying to lose weight. Like they think it's going to happen in a week. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you got to stay at it. And you got to realize, like, as much as intimidating, as hard as it is, once you get there and you see the slow results, it feels so good. It keeps you motivated to wanting to go after more. And that's with
Yeah.
anything you do. When you first create something, you have giant hopes for it. Then when you're 30 in, 50 in, it becomes so comfortable where you're like, I already know what I'm going to be doing. I don't have to worry because people are liking it, people are enjoying it. So
Yeah.
you just keep doing what you want to do. People enjoy it for you. People enjoy what you're creating with your audio drama, for instance.
Yeah.
They're listening because they like the story. They're not listening to it to try and get like some factual information or stuff
No.
like that. They're listening to it because they like the picture you painted to their minds when they listen.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that I have that in common with writers everywhere, really. Whatever medium we're using, whether we're using novels or short stories or poetry, really, we're storytellers. We're all storytellers. We're just using a different way of telling the story and trying to get that atmosphere, that emotion across as in the very best way we can. I published a short story recently. I don't generally write short stories, but I published one recently online, and two people came back and said, "Your story made me cry," and I'm like, two people, yes, have cried at my story. Who knows? It might be 200 or 2,000, but two people have told me they cried at my story. That's a success as far as I'm concerned.
The fact that you're able to create something that impacts someone's life is a success.
Mm.
The fact that anything that you do where you never would have envisioned something happening, doing something in somebody's life that makes it even a little bit better. Even I know some people that have been having a podcast longer than me, but they have such an impactful show. It might have less listeners. And I look at that like, that's why I don't get obsessed with the analytics. I don't
Mm.
get
Mm.
obsessed with the listening. I don't get obsessed with if I'm how many followers I have, because you'll take it down a rabbit hole where you kill the fun. The
Yes.
fun is the fact that you can get even one person reacting to
Yes.
something that you're doing. If that brings them a little bit of peace, you don't know. Like I've heard a buddy of mine who's been on a couple of times. He's like, dude, he's like, I'm driving to work and I always know that there's going to be an out of the blank episode to listen to. And I'm like, hey, that's good, man. And like, I'm happy for it. And he's like, yeah, because your episodes are just chats. And surprisingly, that's a format you really don't see in the world where everyone's got a thought and opinion, but who wants to listen to everybody's thoughts and opinions? I'm like, if we had more of that, the world would probably function a little bit better.
Yeah. How do you find all your guests then?
Just social media.
Yeah.
I just what someday I'll be interested in audio dramas. One day I'll be interested. I'm on a UFO kick like crazy right now, where I'm
Right.
like, I need to talk to everyone that has to do with UFOs.
Right. Okay. So it's all going to be UFOs for a while now, is it?
I had a guy recently, his name's Francis or Francois Schnoll. He's followed by Obama on Twitter. So I
Right.
was like, oh, and he was telling me about like astrophysics and all these types of things. And I'm like, I love this. Like, I like to learn. I like to get information because I think that's what the world's about. You know, some people have more area of expertise than another. It doesn't mean that they're better than you. It just means that you guys have information to share with one another. You know more
Yeah.
about audio dramas than I do. And I give you so much credit because the idea of an audio drama, the process and the work that goes behind getting all the effects and all the proper detail into it to create a story in someone's head is something I don't have the talent to do.
Mm. Mm. It's just good fun. it's like what you do is good fun. You just enjoy doing it. And I think when you enjoy doing something, you keep learning about it, don't you? Yeah. It's no hardship to keep learning and learning about it.
Eventually get it down to a science where it's like, I could do this easy. Someone's like, thank God I got an episode to listen to.
It's interesting what you said, though, about not worrying too much about the marketing side of it, the analytics and all the rest of it. Because one of the things that I was told when I went back to university was, this is about creative writing and all sorts of things you're going to learn about how to do it this way, how to do it that way. But the thing that you have to remember is you write what you're passionate about. You write what you really love. And I think that's crucial. I mean, I think you could write, you could get a formula to write bestsellers or whatever. That's probably relatively easy to do. But, I don't know. Is that really interesting? I don't think I'd have the sticking power to write something just because it was going to be a bestseller or somebody told me it was going to be a bestseller. I think it would be harder to have the fun. You wouldn't have the fun out of it. It would be just like work.
I think when you start letting people bring in insight or bring in some type, like there's acceptance of ideas that a friend can offer, but then there's change that people want out of what you have created. And I think that's where it ends up getting lost. Like I've had plenty of people where it's like, hey, if you did this for your show, I could, like YouTube, I tried to ask them, hey, let me get an advertisement. And I sent them an email. They're like, we've looked through 600 of your episodes out of the ones you do have. And we put in keywords and we can't monetize any of this because you talk about topics. And I'm like, oh, that's my brain though. I like to have fun. And they're like, well, if you stop doing that, we can get you an advertisement. I'm like, man, you're going to mess with my show. I'd rather just be open. That means I got to bust ass till I get it done. It means it got to bust ass till you get it done.
Yeah. I think that's interesting because I think you're along the same lines as me. I just love history. I just love folklore. I love telling stories. I love making people be in another place, taking them to another place, I suppose. And I've got, I don't know how many ideas I've got in my head. I've got 3 plays I've got to work on now. Not got to, 3 plays I've said I'll work on now. So for the next year, I know what ideas I'm going to be working on, but they're bursting out of my head. I'm thinking, oh, when I've done that, that's for that one. And, there's this whole group of women who were dancers in Paris in the 1890s and 1880s. Nobody hears about them. We hear about the artists who painted them. We hear about the men that were in power, but we don't hear about those women. That's brewing away. It's on my bookshelf. It's on my bookshelf behind me. So it's brewing away in here.
Well, Jill, you've given me enough of your time. Where can people find your work, find where people can listen to your show and get a little bit of at least another side of you that, we can't speak in format, obviously, because your work is trying to describe it. It doesn't really do it justice. It really, you have to listen and kind of consume it and really understand the amount of effort that you do put into it.
Okay. The easiest way to find it is on my website, which is www.jillkorn.com. And that's spelled JILLKORN, jillkorn.com. And you'll find everything there.
And I'll make sure I link it on the description. Is there anything you want to end on?
Just thank you for asking me back. I was so pleased and so surprised when you asked me back. It's lovely to talk to you again.
Plenty more, Jill. We'll have plenty of more episodes coming. And thanks for listening to this episode Out of the Blank podcast.